Most modern programs don't just work with plain text files. They work with structured data, and those data are usually either stored in CSV files or in JSON file structures. Now, our text files that we've worked with are kind of like the CSV files because you're able to read them as normal text, make sure that you split the text at the commas, and that's basically how you'd work with them. However, for JSON data structure, it's a little bit different. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, but don't be misled by the name. This format is a universal format that is being used by almost every programming language. So this right here is a dictionary. However, it mimics very much the structure of a JSON format. This similarity here makes it very much easy to work with JSON files in Python because of the built-in JSON module that we have in Python, which is able to easily convert between JSON files and Python objects. In this video, we're going to look into how we can read, write, and handle JSON files properly in Python. The Python's JSON module here gives us 4 functions that allow us to work with JSON files. These functions are the dump, load, dumps, and loads. And we'll talk about the difference between all of those 4 in just a second. Now, the dump allows us to save JSON object to a file. The loads kind of reads JSON from a file. The last 2 here are pretty much the same except that they work with variables or strings that you have in memory. So this, for example, allows you to convert JSON data to a JSON string. And the loads allows you to convert a JSON string to a Python object. So let's go ahead and start looking into how we can use those. I'll start with this object again. I'll create a new variable. I'll call this student, which will equal the same data. So let me just remove that dict1 part. And now I'm going to open a file. So with open student.json, and we'll open this in write mode as F. We're going to call the JSON.dump, where the object is going to be the student object, and the file is going to be a student.json. If we run this, okay, we get an error because I did not import the library. So let me go ahead, import JSON, run it again. Okay, we're still getting an error here that basically says string object has no attribute right. Let's see what I did wrong here. Oh, over here we don't need to provide the path again. We just need to provide the file connection that we have. We can also provide an option here called indent, which basically would allow us to have a prettier formatted file as the output. If we try to run this again, here we go, it successfully executes. If I look at the JSON file, here we go, we have a student.json that includes the name, the age, and the list of courses. And basically the indent equal to is what allows us to have 2 spaces of indentation between each level. That way your data looks a little bit easier to read. If I change this to something like 4 and try to run it again, you see that the JSON output comes with 4 spaces of indentation instead of 2. Now we could also read that file again. So with open that student.json file, and we'll open it in read mode this time as F. And here we'll call the load function. So load this file and capture it into the new object. We'll call it new student. And now if I run this here, and let's actually print out the new student and run it, here we go. It loads the data properly from the JSON file and it outputs it back into our output here. If I change this to something else, and let's go ahead just to confirm that this is not being loaded from another variable. Here we go. We are reading this from the JSON file that we have. Now, because we have this as a dictionary, we're able to read specific properties out of that object. So I could do something like this, give me just a name, and it will output that for us. I could do get me the courses, and we get that as a list of strings. Now, what if that file here was not actually a real JSON file? What if this looked a little bit like a normal text file? This is a normal text file, but we're still saving it as a JSON file. If I try to run this snippet of code right over here, we get an error or an exception of JSON decode error. So now let's try to put in some try except blocks to actually handle those gracefully. So we'll do a try, and let's indent this. If anything goes wrong, so except when we get the JSON decode error, we want you to handle this gracefully by printing out this is not a JSON file or not encoded correctly. So now if I save this, and obviously in this particular case, this is going to fail for a different reason. It's an invalid syntax. Okay, hold on. What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong here? This exception is actually defined in the JSON module itself. So hopefully this is going to work. And let me actually change this as well, because it's going to try to read something that does not exist, obviously. So let's just say we're here. But if I run this, we're still getting the same error with open the student.json file, which is not a real file. We're going to try to capture this data into the new student, except, oh, this needed to be at the same indentation level as the try block. It should not happen inside the with clause here or the context here. It should happen in the root context. So if we run this again, here we go. This is not a JSON file or not encoded properly, and then we get that we are here. Let me try this again without the JSON. Yeah, I think this needed to be imported from the JSON, so I was correct in the beginning. So let's revert this again. So with this, we wrap up our series of working with files and exceptions in Python. We've started with learning how files work and how they are imported into Python. We learned how we read, write, and update. How do we manage our files using the operating system module? And finally, how do we handle our exceptions gracefully so our program does not stop its execution? And then finally, we learned how we can work with the JSON data structure here. And I just realized that I did not talk about these two types here or these two functions here, but I'm sure you can figure those on your own.